Welcome to Legacy Magazine presents The Business of Black Business, a talk show that interviews Black entrepreneurs and advocates for Black businesses. Topics include access to capital, best business practices, success stories, and more. Now introducing our host, Jay Reynolds.
Hi. Question for you. As a Black professional, do you find yourself walking into a room and immediately having to overcome stereotypes? Do you understand those stereotypes? Do you know where they come from? And a better question is, do you have a tool belt to overcome them? This week, we get to talk to someone who can perhaps help us to understand and overcome this information. So tune in for that. My name is Jay Reynolds. I own WolfCreek Consulting. We are a top-ranked executive staffing firm, and this is the business of Black business. This is a show designed to help Black entrepreneurs and would-be Black entrepreneurs start, scale, and basically support support their businesses. It's a unique opportunity to gain access to hear directly from successful business people and people to help you support your business. I want you to be able to hear how they did it. I want you to kind of be in a room where it happens. Today, we get the opportunity to talk about misconceptions and stereotypes. I know that we're all sick and tired of the old saying that as a Black person, we have to work harder and jump higher than anybody else. We've heard that 1,000 times from our parents, and we certainly have probably told our kids. There's so many misconceptions out there that, in my opinion, tear at the very fabric of who we are as a people, certainly who we are as business people. Today, we get the opportunity to discuss that with, I believe, a significant thought leader, Dr. Ivory Toldson. He is the National Director of Education and Innovation and Research at the NAACP. He's a professor, counseling, psychology at Howard University. He's a best-selling author with a number of books, one of which a couple of titles that I have to share with you. One is No BS, Bad Stats, and Black People Need Black People Who Believe in Black People Enough Not to Believe Every Bad Thing They Hear About Black People. That is an amazing title, and one that I would love sharing to people as I talk about Dr. Toldson going forward. Anyway, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you? Tell me a little bit about where you come from. Tell me a little bit about your journey. Tell me maybe who your mentors were and the people that have influenced you to do the things that you do today. Dr. Toldson.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jay, for having me. Can you, thanks so much for having me, Jay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, yeah. This is such a great show, The Business of Black Business. I grew up living in the Black business. My mother owned a home-based daycare center, and she was my first employer. She was my first boss. My first job was cleaning up the daycare center. And I grew up there in the 80s and 90s against the backdrop of some pretty difficult times for the Black community. We had the crack epidemic and Reaganomics that was hurting
absolutely
a lot of the poor Black areas. And so coming up, I was sensitive to this notion that Black people were in a pretty bad state in this country, and I think a lot of people most Black people are sensitive to that because of our own lived experiences, as well as what we observe around us and what we hear from the research and the media. And you talked about misconceptions. One of the things one of the misconceptions that was out there that never affected me was this misconception that everybody in Africa was poor, because on the news, and you would see the infomercials, you think that everybody in Africa was poor.
Yeah, mud huts everywhere. Exactly.
Right. But my mother made us the host family of African students from LSU. I grew up in Baton Rouge. So it was these African
Go
students.
Tigers!
Yeah. Didn't do too well last weekend, but we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. I grew
But
up in Baton Rouge too. We'll talk about that later.
really?
I
Oh
don't know how in the world we missed that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but we were the host family for mostly West Africans, Nigerian, Ghanaians who were studying there. And I remember they would come and they would have these nice cars and they would have these nice apartments. And, these were some of the most wealthy appearing people that I had seen at that point in my life. So when people were saying that people in Africa was poor, I was like, nah, like they got money. They paid. They got more than any Black American I've seen.
Right.
So
right.
we have these images that we see in the media that can either reinforce or run contrary to our own lives. Now, with a lot of what we experience about the information that we receive about Black people, sometimes, or a lot of times, unfortunately, it reinforces what we have experienced or what we've seen, but it's contextualized or it lacks the type of context, and sometimes it can be manipulated so that it gives this confirmation bias that limits our ability to overcome the things that we can overcome, and it also ignores and negates the success that we do have in our communities.
Well, you know what? We're going to drill down into that. I have some follow-up questions for you that will certainly drill down into that. But tell me a little bit about your role at the NAACP and the job that you do and how that fits within, how that helps to address that narrative that you just talked about. Can you hear me, Dr. Toldson? Dr. Toldson? Okay.
Jay, I was having some network issues. I switched to a different network.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah,
so
I can. I can hear you now.
Okay, good.
Were you able to get my question?
No, you said tell me a little bit about, and then that's when I lost my connection.
Okay, no problem. What I was going to say to you is that I would like to hear a little bit about your work with the NAACP and how what the things that you are doing right now within your job title to help you to help us to address those narratives that you just talked about, and then we'll talk about them in specifically in just a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, I was appointed to be the National Director of Education, Innovation, and Research for the NAACP. So that means at a national level, I'm in charge of setting priorities and working with our units and our National Education Committee on every issue related to educational equity, access, the quality of education, educational excellence, the future of education for Black learners. And there's a lot of issues out there. There's a lot of disparities in how Black students are treated versus their counterparts. And we see this in areas like teacher preparation, the quality of the buildings that they're in, different things like access to specialized classes and college prep AP classes. And now recently we've seen this rhetoric in education, by people who are trying to dismantle what they're calling critical race theory. They talk about it is not representative of what critical race theory is. They've manufactured what this decades-old, 40-year-old theory is, and try to present it in their own way to make it seem like our children are being indoctrinated. But really what they're trying to do is shortstop any effort to create a more equitable, diverse, and just learning environment for Black children.
And I think that is so terrible. And bottom line, what's happening is they're weaponizing critical race theory, right?
Yeah.
Weaponizing it for political gains. One of the things that you and I probably have in common in some way, shape, or form is the fact that back when we were coming through high school and whatever, we probably went to a predominantly, for most of my high school, I went to a predominantly black high school, and until desegregation happened, and then we went to an integrated school. But at that time, first of all, you didn't realize or have any conception that you weren't getting a quality education. You just didn't feel that way because of the teachers that you had and because of the fact that we were one big community. I think that in recent times, a lot has happened as it relates to this inequality that we're talking about, because of the fact that these kids are just these kids are in schools where people are not necessarily as committed to them as teachers were committed to me when I was coming up in elementary and high school, and then in college, basically you're on your own. It's a free for all. But I just think that the situation has changed so much.
Yeah. Some things have changed. Some things have stayed the same. I went to a predominantly black high school, but most of my teachers were white. And that happened a lot during the time where you went from segregation to integration, and they closed the real black schools, the schools that had black staff and black students. And then you had students that were being bused into predominantly white schools and then you had white flight. And so the white students left, but the white teachers stayed. And so I was sensitive to the fact that our white teachers did not care about us probably the way that they cared about the white students who used to be there. And I got into a lot of confrontations with my white teachers because I grew up in a family that was very black conscious. And so I was taught certain things and exposed to different readings, readings like the autobiography of Malcolm X. And, I had this library in my house. But, I would have teachers. I had teachers that tried to teach us some pretty absurd things. I mean, Ron DeSantis would be very proud of my teacher.
Yeah, would be very proud. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I got sent to the principal's office because I confronted a teacher who told us that slavery was just a way of life back then, and a lot of slaves, as she called them, had good relationships with their slave masters.
Right, and they loved being there, and they didn't want to be anyplace else. And Jesus Christ was definitely white. I could tell you some of those stories as well. Exactly.
Yeah. So the fight continues. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about what you think the critical challenges are that are facing Black people in America today. From your perspective, what do you think the critical challenges are?
Yeah, so they're numerous, and we all have to work, within our sphere of influence to fight these challenges. There is challenges related to Black business ownership, which you're working on far more than I am. My area is education, and so some of those critical challenges when it comes to education is the type of higher level opportunities there are for students who are in predominantly Black schools. So for instance, when you look at a lot of the school districts in DC are in Miami, so you have Broward County and Miami-Dade. When you look at the schools that have the highest percentage of Black students, typically we'll see things like they don't have 4 units of math or 4 units of science. They'll have that bare minimum. But when it comes to things like physics and calculus, we'll see a lot of that omitted from the curriculum altogether.
It's gone altogether.
Yeah. Right. And so what that means is that students who go to those schools, even the highest performing students, may not come out with the classes that they need to go to the most competitive universities in the state of Florida or nationally, even the state institutions. So it's really an absurd thing when you have your tax dollars funding public education, but also public higher education. Your tax dollars is funding Florida State University, but you have high schools that don't have the curriculum where they could even apply to Florida State University. So that's that's a travesty in my opinion. And then you also have things like disproportionality when it comes to suspensions and other forms of discipline. There's also disproportionality when it comes to assigning students into special education. So numerous challenges when it comes to education.
Got it. And you know, there have been so many situations that I have seen where you have, especially when I'm talking to kids, I try really hard to talk to kids that are going from high school to college and stuff like that, and then basically giving them something to say, you know, to put their finger on and say, hey, look, I can do this because this guy did it, right? I think that's really important. But one of the things that I have noticed, exactly like what you talked about, they're stripping, you know, these STEM programs out of these schools because they don't want to teach them.
Yeah.
And then these kids are going to, even if they get a passing score on the SATs or ACTs or whatever, they're having to go in and take remedial math courses, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? That eliminates them from being engineers and accountants and you know, those types of positions, because they're already starting from a negative point, a negative point because of the fact that they've had to take these remedial classes. Now, certainly, smart kids are going to be smart kids, and they're going to catch up. But that's one of the things that I see, like, immediately, is that you start talking to these smart kids that basically have not gone through STEM programs, that have all of the aptitude to do, you know, all kinds of things, but they're not able to experience that.
And that's so important what you said, and it gets into why I wrote the book, because, you know, like you said something very important. You talked about the smart kids at these schools. Now, what the media will lead us to believe, and even some of the research will lead us to believe, that you don't put calculus at your predominantly Black schools in Miami because you don't have kids who will be able to keep up with it. You know, they're too busy saying that 100% of the kids not even reading on grade level. And these are excuses I've heard. You know, when I'm asking, you know, why don't you have AP classes at this school? And you have people saying, this school? You know, at this school, they can't even read. How are we going to give them physics? Which is absurd. So, you know, we've been giving information that will lead us to believe that we're the problem, and that we don't have certain things because we haven't done enough to get capability to even compete successfully. But that's not true. We don't have those things because of systemic racism. And a lot of the information that we are exposed to will lead us to ignoring the systemic racism that is at the root of why we don't have certain things.
You know, I want to kind of drill down into that a little bit. Why don't you tell me some of the most common misconceptions about the Black community? And if you want to, I know primarily this is the business of Black business, so it would be nice if we talked a little bit about that. But education, because it's a forte, certainly, you know, they work hand in hand, right? Education, opportunity, education, entrepreneurship. So I agree with you 100%. It's certainly very important. But as you consider, what are some of the most common misconceptions about the Black community? What are they?
Yeah.
And I know you could spend a day talking about this.
I could. I could write a book about it.
I know you could. Doc, I know you could.
Yeah. But
it's only
you know,
30 minutes
just
so I need to pull all of this information out of you as quickly as I can.
Yeah, just to give one example, you know, there are more Black men in prison than college. That's a misconception. So there's almost 1 million more Black men in college than prison right now.
So are you telling me that's not true?
That is not true. That is not true.
Thank you. Praise the Lord. I wanted to just the fact that you just wiped that out of my head. Thank you very much.
Yes. And and the analysis is in the book. I'm not the first to do the analysis though. I remember there was in doing my own research, one of the earliest articles I saw was a white reporter from the Washington Post that ran the same analysis and did almost a tongue-in-cheek article, you know, saying that it wasn't true, but you know how much people like to say it. But you know, it was around 2012 that James Morton, a documentary filmmaker, and I ran the analysis, redid the study And we put out a series of articles, and he put out a documentary on it, which got the attention of the original authors of that report, the Justice Policy Institute, and they tried to challenge my findings. We went on the BBC together, and I basically showed them how their work was flawed, was very flawed, and they had no defense for it. And then we were supposed to go on NPR after that, and they backed out of that interview.
They backed out of the interview.
They backed out of the interview. So, we can do another show for me to tell you, how that stat came into existence, why people believed it, what they did wrong. But it's not true. Trust me.
I got to tell you, we're going to do another show that talks about some of those misconceptions. Yeah. Because we need to wipe some of that stuff away. I mean, I am a guy who likes to think that he's a fairly well-read, educated guy, and I have that swimming around in my head, for years, because I thought it came from a credible source, and we'll talk about that here in a second. That's another thing I want to talk about. But talk to me a little bit about how you think these misconceptions impact us emotionally and psychologically, the community. And does it have like a multi-generational kind of impact on who we are as a people long term?
Yeah, it could. And there's I think there's a good number of us that believe that these stats could motivate us.
Sure.
And they tell these stats to children, to very young children, thinking that it's going to be like a wake-up call. But that's a social experiment that nobody else has had to deal with. We've never made white children or Asian children have wake-up calls as a way of making them successful.
Yes.
What we do is
right?
What they do is try to motivate. Right. And one of the things I noticed early on when I started debunking things like more Black men in prison and college, there was a lot of Black activists who treated me like I was taking something away from them because they were so used to saying it, and it was a part of their stump speech. And
right, exactly.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Like I was met with a lot of skepticism, but I'll tell you who never gave me any skepticism and who always celebrated the findings was Black children, young Black people. If I tell a group of high school Black boys there are more Black men in college than prison, the eyes light up. You see hope. You see inspiration. None of them was hanging on to it. None of them was like, oh, you taking that away from me. Now I don't have the motivation to go on. They weren't using it that way. They were using it. They were scared.
Because Dr. Toldson, I can tell you that I've actually been in rooms where Black speakers, male speakers, typically speaking, dynamic guys, well-read guys, whatever, would stand up in front of the room, and as a part of their, like you just said, stump speech, that's how they would lead off with that. I have been in a room when that has happened many times. But you know what will change is that I'm going to be the guy from now on, and anybody else listening here, whenever you're standing in front of the room, that's how we change that narrative. I know now that there are more Black men in college than in prison, and I will debunk that every single chance that I get. And we have to do that as a people. But it helps me. I got to drill down into this a little deeper. Sometimes this research is coming from some what we believe to be credible sources, right?
Yeah.
So credible sources, and it's being espoused by people that we believe are credible. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, well, you always got to be skeptical, and I don't care who it comes from. Like if someone wrote something negative about your child, it doesn't matter what their credentials are. You're gonna want some answers, and even if you trust them at face value, you want more detail and context, right? So it might be an expert that says that your child is on the autistic spectrum. If you have a certain experience with your child, if you've seen your child, go through all these dynamic situations. You've seen them interact with their peers. Nothing is wrong with your child from your perspective, but an expert is telling you that there's something wrong with your child. You're going to want to know about the test. You're going to want to know if they got all the information that they needed. So we have to do the same thing when it comes to statistics and data about Black children. And we can't memify, the information that we have. If all you see is a headline, if somebody just sends you on Instagram a headline that says something, you got to read the study before you start repeating it. So those are types of things. And I do want to say one thing about entrepreneurship, because I think there's a way that this is all connected. I remember this man, a Black man, who said that he wanted to work on entrepreneurship among young Black people, which is a noble cause. And then he said, because I've visited Africa and some of the developing countries, and there's a different kind of hustle when it comes to the Black children there. They're always on the streets trying to get money, trying to sell something. And I said, you mean like Alton Sterling and Eric Garner? Like they were on the street selling something, right?
Yeah. And
like
that wasn't a good thing, right? Right. You see where that got them. And
they got,
I don't mean that in an ugly way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So that's how, the narrative that we're feeding ourselves, it makes us ignore the true corporates. The corporate isn't that young Black kids aren't trying to sell something. The corporate is systemic racism, is that they can get murdered for doing that. That we're in a capitalistic structure where Eric Garner selling loose cigarettes is a threat to different, corner stores that's around, and maybe even the cigarette companies. Yeah. And so the police officers, which really shouldn't be any part of that. If the companies want to sue Eric Garner, they can sue him. But why would you have a police officer enforcing that? That is a true problem, not the lack of entrepreneur spirit among Black children or Black, men in that case.
I don't think that exists. I mean, I really don't. And I think that kids, typically speaking, to some degree, will try to emulate what they see anyway. You just got to give them positive images.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about Black businessmen. I mean, Black entrepreneurs, not businessmen. I mean that in the most broadest sense. Business people. What do you feel as though they are having to deal with, some of the misconceptions that they have to deal with, or some of the stereotypes that they're having to deal with, and maybe give us some ideas of how to arm themselves against that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all the negative stats that they see, they have to be in a position to counter them. And I mostly focus on education stats, but we've already established that a lot of the education stats is connected to entrepreneurship and business. So just knowing that, can help to generalize that to a broader concept. But in terms of young people, they have to be visible because young people aren't being taught entrepreneurship the way that they should be in schools. But everyone needs to understand certain basic principles about the power of ownership, owning your own business, taxes, and all those types of things. And doing things like the stock market and all of that. So the more present the entrepreneur community is to young people, I think that'll spur that among them. And then I see too many people who don't own businesses talking about the lack of businesses that's in the Black community, and they'll come out and say, we don't have anything but Koreans, running our neighborhood, like all these types of tropes. So, being in a position to counter that, like Black businesses do exist, and they exist in numbers that we wouldn't expect. And just because you may not see them on your corners doesn't mean they exist. And sometimes these businesses that we think we should be controlling may not necessarily be the most desirable businesses.
Exactly.
And,
Hey,
yeah,
let the Korean guy have the corner store, but you own the HVAC service company, or you
right.
own
Yeah.
the electrical company. I mean a company full of electricians, or
Hmm.
any of those other kinds of things, that they don't necessarily have to
Yeah.
be the corner liquor store. Who care? I can't say
Hmm.
who cares about that, because that's part of us, the fabric of our community. But there's so many other things that we can do in our Black community to circulate that dollar a lot more than we're
Yeah.
circulating the dollar today.
Yeah. There's so many Black owned distilleries that's popping up.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, we got Black owned bourbons now.
yeah,
We got Uncle Nearest.
yeah,
We got the Black Girl Magic wine.
yeah.
Maybe we don't need to own the liquor store on the corner. Maybe we the ones supplying. There's different parts of that supply chain.
Exactly, exactly.
So,
Yeah. And the other parts of that distribution channel, you're exactly right. We don't have to be like, taking, selling it. We could
mhm.
be manufacturing it and distributing it, and
Yeah.
owning the trucking companies that get it there. And I agree with you 100%. I want to, I could talk to you for probably hours, right? Because
Mhm.
the stuff that you're talking about is so topical and so interesting to me. But what I would like you to do is tell us something that we haven't talked about already that you think is important. That's
Mhm.
I haven't asked you a question about, but something that you believe, based on your experiences and the work that you're doing right now with the NAACP, it would be important for people to know.
Yeah. Well, in the short period of time, we've touched on a lot of very important topics. But I do want to continue this conversation. I will be in Miami tomorrow. I'll be a part of the event that's happening at the Ampersand Theater, um, and we'll talk about all of these different things. But I do think that education is very important. I think that there's some critical moments in history right now, and the way that they're challenging the diversity that's happening in schools right now. That's a fight that we can't afford to be complacent about.
Mhm.
Our children need to know the truth about who they are and where they came from. And we have people out there, like in South Carolina, they're literally suing school districts just because the school districts want the school to teach children an authentic history. So that's a fight that I'm a part of right now that I hope people will also join in and take serious.
Well, we'll talk about that in just another second, but because you have this upcoming thing, and I want to share with. Why don't you tell us about it, and maybe we can put the flyer up there. Why don't you tell us about your upcoming event?
Yeah, so I'll be there. The title of it is No BS for Bad Stats. It's time to believe in Black people again, and we'll be talking about a lot of things that we talked about here. Um, you mentioned that I have training as a psychologist, and I do believe that cognitive processing is a very important part of our psychological health, a part of our self-esteem and our self-efficacy. And in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to believe in yourself. There's no way to be an entrepreneur without believing in yourself, believing in your ability, because that allows you to take the kind of risk and to invest in yourself. And so we have to deal with how these negative statistics are being perpetuated and portrayed that are by design to make us think that we're capable of less than we are.
Got it. And hey, not listening to that for 1 second, and not only listening to that, but I'm trying really, really hard to make sure that we continue to get the word out to people that so folks understand that, hey, look, we have our own history. We can chart our own paths, and we don't necessarily have to let people tell us, who we are and where we're going. And
Mhm.
and I applaud guys like you that are doing it in such a macro way, right?
Yeah.
The work that you're doing is really, really important, Dr. Toldson, and it's topical. Everything that you talked about so far is topical and very important, and continue the good work. if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
My Twitter is Toldson, at Toldson at my last name. You could also search me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I think those are the best social media platforms. And then, you could reach me by email at itolson@howard.edu. I also have a website, Toldson.com, just my last name.com.
Okay, cool, perfect. Hey, before I let you go, we'll come back to you in 1 second. I just need to thank the sponsors and the people that allow this to happen. This is the business of Black business, and we would not be able to do this without a number of people that have made it happen. We're in our second year of doing this, and it's because of people like DeMeziman and Dover, personal injury attorneys, Victor and your crew. Thank you very much for all you do to support Black businesses as well as HBCUs. You put your money where your mouth is. Career Source South Florida. Career Source South Florida has also been a longtime sponsor. And one of the things about Career Source South Florida is they have on a weekly basis, they have jobs that they post on their website that could potentially change your life. A number of positions that all you've got to do is go to their website and apply for these positions. And also, FAMU Medical Marijuana Education and Research Institute. Thank you guys for being a sponsor. Some of the jobs, I'll tell you what, I'll go back and take a look at some of the jobs. I want to read some of the jobs right now in Career Source South Florida that you can actually go and apply for. A director of finance, $47 an hour, and an aircraft engineer, $34 an hour, business development specialist, $26 an hour, a career service representative, $20 an hour, a CNC programmer, $20 an hour, tool crib assistant, inventory control person, $18 an hour, director of special events, $17 an hour, warehouse associate, $17 an hour, a security guard, $13 an hour, and a baker, $12 an hour. Now, what's good about this is that each and every week, these guys at Career Source, they change these positions, and you may just very well find a job that changes the trajectory of your life. Go to the website and take a look. So finally, the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County, and last but certainly not least, AARP. Thank you guys for making this important. I really appreciate that. And again, Dr. Toldson, you're a busy guy. You have a national footprint. You're spending your time doing a lot of things. So I appreciate you taking the time out to have this discussion. I think it's topical and certainly very important. Before I let you go, I want to give you the last word. Why don't you leave us with 3 things that you think are important as it relates to understanding the narratives that we talked about and girding ourselves or protecting ourselves or understanding the tools that we need that we can use to not necessarily get caught.
Yeah, well, a lot of people use data and statistics to understand people, but we really should use people to understand data and statistics. So when you have a stat, you don't really know about that person. You know the stat, and the stat could be true, but the person gives you the proper context for that stat, which is always very important. When it comes to education, it's important to talk to children. It's important to talk to the students, because you can see a stat saying that 50% of students at one school has been truant. You can't just start talking about those students, right after you see that stat. And our impulse is to say, oh, they don't care about education, but until you talk to them, because I remember talking to a student from a school that had these truancy problems, and he was saying that most of the students were being turned around because of dress code violations. So they were coming, but they were being turned around. So and these are dress code violations that a lot of students at other schools don't even have to deal with.
You don't have to deal with it at all.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So we have to check in with our students, and end on this. With my own son, 9 years old, he was spending a lot of time with me last summer, going to different events. And when a man asked him, how did it feel to be around all these older people? And my son said, it was cool. And he said, you like hanging around older people? And my son said, yeah, kind of in a shy way. And he never really particularly seemed like he liked to be around older people. And so the guy asked him why. And I'm immediately thinking, as a father, oh, he's going to say because he learns from them. That's what he's supposed to say.
Right.
But he said because they smile a lot and they treat me in a very friendly way. So that gave a whole different perspective to me when I interact with much younger people. Like, they don't just necessarily need to hear lessons. They just need to know that I'm cool. They need to know that I'm in their corner. They need to know that I have their back. So there's a lot that we can learn from talking to people much younger than us.
Yeah. A kid told me one time, said, one of the things I like about you, Mr. Reynolds, is that you listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Just as simple as that. You listen to me,
Mm-hmm.
and we can never underestimate how important that is. The smiling and embracing of kids and just listening to them, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got to tell you, Doc, I'm going to let you go because I know you have a lot going on and you wear a lot of hats, and I appreciate you spending the time here. So again, Dr. Ivory Toldson, I really appreciate your time. The work that you're doing is important. Keep doing that. Keep doing that, because if people like you don't tell our story, then we'll have other people tell our story for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't believe that makes that, for me, that's scary, right?
Yeah. That's BS.
No BS. Exactly. This is the Business of Black Business. My name is Jay Reynolds. I own WolfCreek Consulting. We're an executive staffing firm. And again, I want to thank Dr. Toldson for being here. And we will do this again next week, the same time, 1 p.m. each and every Monday. And you guys make it a great day. I hope you had a great holiday weekend.
All right. Thank you.